Illogical versus ecological jiu jitsu. Dad hats versus bucket hats. There were a lot of intriguing headlines heading into this match between the newcomer Deandre Corbe and the veteran Ethan Crelinsten. And just like any match, this one started from standing.
Who knew you were so insightful?
Now, Ethan's strategy during the standing portion was to constantly wear on the head of Deandre. So when Ethan has a collar tie and Deandre clears it, Ethan uses that momentum to take a grip on Deandre's wrist, to free up his other arm and take a collar tie on the opposite side.
Game plan for Ethan is to come out and wrestle and try and use, heavy hand fighting, hanging on the head, things like that, to tire Deandre out.
So Ethan's constantly looking for those collar ties. And a great way to deal with a collar tie is by using a slide by, with the goal of getting to our opponent's back. But in order to get there, we need to get past their 3 layers of defense.
So the lines of defense: head, hands, hips.
In order to take someone down, we need to get past their head, their hands, and ultimately their hips. So on this slide-by attempt, Deandre's able to get past the head and the hips of Ethan, but Ethan's hand is the defensive layer that prevents the successful slide-by. On this slide-by attempt, Deandre beats the head and the hands, but Ethan uses his hips to defend, before ultimately bringing his arms back into the equation. Now on this final takedown sequence, Deandre shoots in, beating the head and arms of Ethan, and now it becomes a battle at the hips. And Ethan's the one who's able to win the battle at the hips, as he drives his knee across to the far hip of Deandre, pinning him to the mat and taking top position. Now, a lot of times when you're trying to practice things from standing position, it can be a bit intense, but you can practice these same principles from guard.
Our opponent's goal with the 2-on-1, similar to the arm drag, is to bring my arm across their body.
If our opponent brings our arm across their body, they have now essentially beaten our hands. So at this point, we now have our head or hips to defend.
If he's looking to get behind me, he wants to get his head behind me, right? So ways I can look to prevent this is by bringing my head in front of his shoulder. So now when he looks to accomplish the same thing, it's going to be much more difficult.
If our opponent has a 2-on-1 wrist grip, they're winning the battle at the hands, but we can use head position to make it difficult for them to use this grip. As our opponent tries to bring our arm across their body, we can bring our hips to the opposite side. Now again, this is the same principle as Deandre threatening a slide-by, bringing Ethan's arm across his body. So Ethan brings his hips to the opposite side to defend. Now both of these examples look very slick and very intense, but it can be as simple as Deandre taking a 2-on-1 grip and pulling it across his body. So Gavin just walks his hips towards the opposite side, forcing Deandre to let go of that grip and they disengage. Or Felipe Pena pulls Ty's arm across his body, so Ty stands and threatens to walk to the other side. So Felipe lets go of the grip and nothing really happens. So by applying the basic wrestling idea of head, hands, and hips, we can make ourselves very sound defensively and start to become more like coach.
Your coaches never shoot on you. To protect their body, to make sure that they win more consistently, is they take less risks by playing more defense.
So lately, when I've been thinking about defense, I'm asking myself, how can I use my head, my hands, and my hips to help me escape? For example, when defending a guillotine, a good first initial response could be to focus on the hands, but our opponent can transition to something like a high-risk guillotine, making it hard for us to fight the hands as they get the finish. So now instead of using our hands to alleviate strangle pressure, we can use them to create base. And the focus of our escape comes down to head position.
With a low risk guillotine, usually I could fight the hands, there's other things that I can do from here. But if he goes in for a high risk guillotine, the hand becomes a lot less accessible. And so what I was doing in positions like this would be to roll my head to the center.
This was a major takeaway for me from watching Deandre and Ethan wrestle. And I'm finding it to be very helpful when thinking about defense, and hopefully you do as well. Now that Deandre is playing guard, his main focus is going to be to off-balance Ethan.
The guarded position, the main problem is I'm carrying weight. If you're not able to put them on their hips or hands, you're in trouble.
Now, sometimes our opponents are nice enough to try and run away from us, causing themselves to fall down to their hip.
So if I flee and I fall to the floor, what have I done to myself? Destabilizing yourself.
But someone like Ethan is very comfortable in leg entanglements, and he's going to maintain a very stable structure. So we're going to need ways to off-balance him. And one of the more reliable ways of doing so is by grabbing the secondary leg. But the problem is our opponent can take a very wide stance.
And Ethan kept a very tall and wide stance. Ethan has long limbs. And so he knows that if there's no way that anyone gets to my secondary leg, I'm not going to that floor. And that's exactly what he did. He kept that secondary leg away and he fought hard for it.
So if we can't reach the secondary leg, we need to have an attack on the primary leg. We can see this principle take place when Deandre enters the leg of Ethan. Deandre would like to get control of that secondary leg, but Ethan keeps it very far away.
And the answer for that is to switch legs. When I say switch legs, instead of securing cross arch on this leg, I'm going to secure on this near side leg.
So Ethan is successful at hiding his secondary leg, but it opens up Deandre's attacks on the primary leg. Again, here we see Deandre working to off-balance Ethan, and Ethan's keeping that secondary leg very far away, so Deandre needs an attack on the primary leg. But Ethan's keeping that primary leg safe by keeping his feet behind his hips.
His goal is to get my knees and feet out in front of my body and sit my ass down with my body up here and my legs out in front of me.
So Ethan taking this posture of putting his feet behind his hips makes it very hard for Deandre to sit Ethan down to his butt. But if we were able to convert this into a backside leg entanglement, now the feet being behind the hips would be good for the attacker. And the way we get to backside entanglements is through rotation.
And start trying to invert through 50-50.
So again, Deandre's ultimate goal is to off-balance Ethan, and Ethan is keeping his secondary leg very far away, which means Deandre is going to have to attack the primary leg of Ethan, and he looks to do so through rotation towards backside 50-50. But as Deandre inverts, Ethan stuffs the hook of Deandre, denying the entry into backside 50-50. It's pretty much the same thing as the sequence between Joseph and Elijah, where Elijah's trying to enter backside 50-50, but Joseph goes towards him and sinks his weight down, denying the hook and preventing the backside 50-50 entry. But in order to do this, Joseph had to bring his foot out in front of his hips. And if we go back to Deandre and Ethan, you can see Ethan's foot slide forward, which allows him to sink his weight back and deny the backside 50-50 hook. But this means that Joseph and Ethan are both now vulnerable to being put on their butt. Now Joseph did a great job of controlling Elijah's other leg, making it hard for Elijah to take advantage of this vulnerability, and Joseph's able to escape. But Ethan neglected that other leg, allowing Deandre to pummel it to the inside and use it to off-balance Ethan backwards. And in this way, Deandre was able to threaten the primary leg through rotation, and ultimately destabilize Ethan down to a hip. Here's another example of Ethan building height to defend against this leg entanglement. And Deandre again starts to threaten the primary leg. And the idea is if the attacker can rotate through, they can threaten a heel hook. So I think the way Greg might word this is we play a dilemma between getting control over the secondary leg or capturing the toes of the primary leg. And by threatening rotation towards a backside leg entanglement, Deandre forces Ethan into a defensive role, which prevents Deandre from capturing the toes and threatening a heel hook. But it also means Ethan had to put his butt on the ground. And now Deandre is able to get control of the secondary leg, and things start to get very interesting. Ethan starts to chase this toe hold, most likely with the goal of looking to transition into this toe hold knee bar.
Lock up a toe hold first with your thumb, then without your thumb. Pull the knee in deeper and lock your triangle.
As Ethan's attacking his toe hold, Deandre has control over the secondary leg and is setting up attacks of his own.
Call an ambulance! Call an ambulance! But not for me!
When we're attacking the legs, we need to separate the primary leg we're attacking from everything else. And it can be a great idea to bring that secondary leg across to the other side of our body, giving us a good opportunity to attack a heel hook on the primary leg. Now this tends to be a very good strategy when attacking from cross ashi, but from 50-50 it seems to be less reliable.
It's not really worth in 50-50 or 90-10 trying to pass the leg across the body. It's just, you end up too shallow on both legs. Very hard to, if Joey's scooting back, I'm not really going to be able to capture either heel. You'll probably waste your time there. Maybe you get it occasionally, but to me, that's not high percentage. Okay?
Instead, what we're going to look to do is grip underneath the secondary leg.
I'm going to grip underneath this foot to keep the leg out. I'm going to try and do almost like a crab hook by bringing my knee through and try and put my knee on the ground and my head on the ground.
Deandre is able to get heel exposure and force Ethan to bail on his toe hold. And again, Ethan is very composed and comfortable, slips his heel and escapes. And now with Ethan in top position, it seems like the fatigue is setting in and Deandre is no longer using his guard to off-balance Ethan. And with a stable base, Ethan's able to pass the guard relatively easily.
That level of motion under that level of strong base and pressure is fatiguing.
Yeah.
And as we said before, like the guarded position, the main problem is I'm carrying weight. So if you're carrying weight for 5 minutes against a strong player who knows how to apply that weight, it's going to be fatiguing.
and once Ethan got on top, we saw some very patient guard passing. And even once he passed the guard, he was controlling the hips very well. And I'm still trying to organize my thoughts around this, so stay tuned. And I'll talk to you either in the Discord or after ADCC and CJI. And if you see me at either event, be sure to come say hi. I'll be one of the people wearing this shirt, which is now available on X Marshall's website along with a couple rash guards.